if you look at 2020, obviously it kind of had put pressure on various topics and that have been around. We talked about ESG earlier in the first part of the portfolio day, but then this pandemic happened, and I think it kind of made us reevaluate our positions, not positions in the investment sense in terms of investment positions, but also positions on certain other overarching themes. So we wanted to take this opportunity with our great panelists, who I'm going to introduce very briefly in a sec, to sort of discuss, how everyone is handling what's going on with COVID, sort of the impact maybe, or the view on ESG in light of this, and also obviously diversity, which is a big topic, and that sort of moves many people. So I'm super happy to welcome our three panelists. Varun from Accel, we have Carolina from EQT, and then also we have Thomas from Insight. I'm super happy that you all made it and participate in our panel today. So I would say I'll like to kick off with Carolina, because I heard you earlier and I know your mic works. So let's let's start with you. But everyone else, you guys have seen the list of the questions that we sort of prepared. We will not go through all of them, but if you want to add something to some question that I ask someone else, obviously feel free to chime in, all panelists. Yeah. So starting with Carolina. What's sort of your current feeling in the firm, and like how do you feel about COVID? Are you still in sort of crisis mode, or have you guys adjusted under sort of back to business, if you wish?
Yeah, it's been interesting because as you know, EQT is a global investment firm, and it has several investment strategies, all the way from private equity, very mature businesses, to ventures. And I think what we've seen is that companies have found a new normal. They took, a moment to adjust early on in March and in April. And then they've sort of had time now to sort of observe what has happened since. And I think particularly within the technology portfolio, what we've seen is actually they've massively benefited from COVID for the most part, or hopefully come out stronger than ever before.
Varun or Thomas, for you guys, are you guys in crisis mode, or does it feel like back to regular business?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and hello everyone. Varun from Accel, nice to meet all of you. I think from what we saw, at least first I can maybe address this internally, which is from Accel's point of view, which is we were in sort of crisis mode for the first few weeks. There was a lot of portfolio work helping our portfolio companies through budgeting and trying to understand what, how they manage cash for a crisis that honestly, none of us knew how long it's going to last. And we still don't know to some extent today. But I would say that coming off, let's say around the May timeframe, so end of May onwards, at least what we're seeing in the market is very much sort of a back to normal, but more so, there's been a lot of acceleration. And that's because partly the companies that we focus on, I think across the sort of virtual table we have today is around tech. And these companies have really taken advantage of the trends towards digitization that we're seeing during COVID. And that has meant, an uptake in terms of the traction, usage in some cases for a lot of the products that these companies are building. And as a result, in terms of funding as well. So, and I think we're going to come to this maybe slightly later, and I'm anticipating a question here, but in terms of runway, a lot of what we tell our companies is to make sure that you get more runway than you would normally like. And that's just because of the uncertainty of what we're going through. And as a result, we've seen fundraisings be bigger than what you would expect them to be, especially for the companies that are doing really well.
Mm.
Yeah, hey, and Thomas from Insight. I'd echo what Varun said. And when it first hit, we spent a lot of time with the portfolio, kind of tiering, on a grid, like how much is your demand going to be impacted, and what is your liquidity position? And based on where you fall in that grid across those two dimensions, kind of taking action. And I think one thing we've been obviously happy to see is, we're focused on scale ups in terms of sort of the stage in which we invest in companies. So kind of post product market fit, they have, a meaningful base of recurring revenue. Generally, I don't know, 80-90% of our investments are in the SaaS world. And look, I mean, it's proven to be quite resilient. If you look at the public markets, we've had 3 companies go public, since the pandemic. But we're mindful it is, in some ways a K-shaped recovery. There are clear winners and losers. And I think we're also finding ways as a firm that we can help just shore up, local economies. I mean, we've had a very generous program around, supporting local business where all our employees are located, making sure that we're focused in using kind of this time to think critically about topics like ESG and diversity and inclusion, actually, to sort of be a thought leader when we have sort of an advantageous position in the market relative to, a turbulent macro kind of economic backdrop. So I think the topics that we're going to talk about more beyond this are definitely relevant and important to focus on, especially since we've all, I mean, for the most part, been fortunate in kind of the shape of the recovery around software.
Maybe to all of you really quickly, sort of rapid fire, any sort of, amongst all the mess, any sort of positive surprise that stands out to you? Whoever goes first.
I can go first. I think just piggybacking what everyone has said, I think it's been great to see, particularly in more traditional risk-averse sectors, particularly healthcare or financial services, how COVID and the necessity to rely on technology has really accelerated the penetration and the adoption penetration of some of these technologies. And obviously, we've all lived for this, we've all believed in this. But it's been, a really incredible thing to observe how everyone sort of, had to adapt to tech much quicker than ever before.
Anyone else who wants to chime in? Otherwise, move on.
No, I'd just say I'd echo that. A lot of the big trends in software got pulled forward. Digital transformation, remote work, companies in our portfolio like AnyDesk, or actually one of the fastest growing companies in our portfolio does a subscription to high-end dog food, right? And so you see the e-commerce trends getting pulled forward. So there definitely is some positives and some silver linings.
Speaking of e-commerce, Varun, would you say, maybe we have all this common, like discarded e-commerce and maybe MarTech companies a bit too soon in the past few years, given what's happening now?
Yeah, I think so, right? In fact, just a couple of days ago, we released what we do, sort of an annual Accel Euroscape report, where we profile the top 100 SaaS companies that have come out of Europe and Israel. And one of the findings from that list was that I think it was around 8 or 9 companies in the e-commerce marketing space that have raised money in the last 6 months. And I think just before this panel, I said, let me do a quick count. And there was about $1.5 billion worth of funding that just these 9 companies had raised. And so I actually think that COVID in many ways has sort of really accelerated this whole e-commerce, trends around e-commerce and marketing. And it's something that a lot of investors had sort of previously said that these categories had played out, but it seems like they have another wind under their sails now.
I mean, a lot of the sort of D2C companies have fallen out of favor over the past few years, right? And then now, obviously, you see a lot of those companies actually massively overperforming compared to their plans. So, all right, moving on a little bit. So there's some voices we spoke about in our close part of the portfolio today about ESG a little bit, and so there's some voices in the market calling or going so far as calling ESG a complete fraud and a way for borrowing money at a negative rate. So Carolina, maybe over to you. How do you see this? Would you sort of subscribe to that statement, or what are your thoughts around this?
Yeah, I completely disagree with the statement. I think actually that if you don't believe that you're helping future-proof your companies by making them view things with a sustainability lens and with a diversity lens, you will lose. If you look at talent today, absolutely, this is something that people care about. So if for nothing else, the best people will drift towards companies that have a mission and have an impact. And, you know, for EQT itself, it's on the website. It's also in our articles of association, that the reason why we exist is to make a positive impact. And I know that it drives everyone else there. So yeah, I totally disagree with that statement.
Thomas,
Yeah.
what do you think? What do you think about that statement as well? And do you see it from your perspective? Like people are. I listen to a lot of invest like the best, and there's a lot of discussion around like cost of ESG and whether it's worth doing it. So what's your point of view there?
Look, I mean, I think we're somewhat early adopters in having an ESG mandate for every single new investment. There had to be a level of ESG diligence that happened back, and this started almost 5 years ago. Part of it was driven by the fact that we have a larger fund, so we have much more like a very institutional set of LPs that were early adopters of it. I think early on, there was a learning process. It felt a little bit like a check the box exercise at first. And as we've matured and started to do it more, and then have ongoing monitoring back and looking back at what were some of the areas we identified, whether it's a human resources policy or just proper governance around the board, being able to have that ongoing monitoring has made us come to realize, now that we've done it for 5 years, that there can actually be a real benefit and impact from a positive perspective on these companies and how they're positioned in the market. And certainly you've seen some of these horror stories of what toxic culture at startups can do in terms of leading to poor results, and getting ahead of that with ESG actually I think has been an advantage for us. So I'm a big believer as well, like Carolina.
Cool. Varun, so for a long time, and I think still, our goal as an investor, and I assume your goal as well, was to invest in great teams. And so, a lot of investments, obviously, all the firms have done in the past are extraordinary, but also in terms of diversity, when it comes to teams, a lot of those teams look quite similar, right? And so we were wondering, do you think we sort of have to define or redefine what we call sort of a great founders team? Are there any sort of thoughts related to diversity in terms of how you guys are approaching, selection of great teams, and what a great team, the definition of a great team is?
For sure. And I think what we've seen in these last sort of 12, 24 months, I think has shone a light on, I think, some of the shortcomings in terms of, what people sort of considered a great founding team. And I'm, we're happy to see that, this continues to, and people are taking sort of a closer look at what this means. I can say that, at Accel, we do a few things, and would love to also hear from Carolina and Thomas as to, what they've been doing. But we have part of the organization that focuses exclusively sort of on network, right? And we try and unearth founders who may not have had easy access to that same network that other folks or repeat founders do, who may not have had access to capital like others do. So we're trying to differentiate our sourcing mechanisms and trying to give these people and people from underrepresented communities access to VC and other forms of capital in India. So I know this is focused on sort of the Europe, but I will say that one of the interesting initiatives that's worked really well for us is this what's called a Seed to Scale initiative, where we find founders who specifically haven't founded companies in the past or don't have access to this capital, and then provide them with the community and that network and allow them then to grow. So I think there's one piece which can be done sort of pre-investment, but then there's also a piece around portfolio, that can be done. So for example, helping portfolio companies track diversity, not only in terms of their senior management team, but on the board, and helping and giving access to this same network that I described to your portfolio company, so that they can also continuously improve the profile of their businesses. Anyone else that wants to chime in on this? You don't have to.
Look, I mean, you want to be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think Insight, because we are a thought leader in the VC world, we want to make sure that we're driving this industry in the right direction from a diversity inclusion perspective. So we have a variety of different initiatives. They've ranged from, having a diversity pledge component in all of our term sheets now, a commitment to tracking it, as Varun said, so that we can get better. And even internally, so making sure that we're sourcing talent from an Insight perspective in pockets where we hadn't maybe previously prioritized, or even changing how we interface with historically Black colleges and their endowments, and removing minimums for giving them access to our funds. So it's across the entire life cycle, from the investment, internal, our LPs, and hopefully, driving that change in a positive way for the industry.
Fantastic. Thank you. So first I need to unmute myself, and then I would like to bring it back to sort of where we started with, the crisis that we have at hand, our COVID 2020, with probably the last question to all of you. I mean, there's obviously, you mentioned already, there's obviously certain sectors that really sort of, got accelerated and pushed forward because of the pandemic. I mean, we're using Zoom. We all know what happened to the share price of Zoom over the past, 6 months. So is there anything that you would say, maybe starting with Carolina, like, where you say there is like a maybe sector or vertical that you would look at, maybe besides sort of the traditional, work from home type of things that you would specifically look at for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think one of the areas that actually had already fascinated me before, but I think is even more fascinating now is mental health. I think people have adjusted to the new normal, to the new way of working, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. There's still sort of the lack of the human connection, right? I can see that most of us here are sitting at home, and I think that's a sector that was already exploding, right? Because technology was already democratizing access to it, but I think will serve an even bigger sort of social purpose in the foreseeable future here through COVID.
Varun or Thomas?
I was just going to say, I spend a lot of my time focused on the infrastructure, software, security, cybersecurity kind of sector. And I mean, that is just undergoing such a tremendous amount of change so rapidly. The attack surface area of a company in this remote work world, and now it's going to be hybrid or blended for the foreseeable future, has just opened so many new vectors for, bad guys. And that, obviously creates an interesting opportunity, especially for companies that can leverage machine learning and AI and their solutions to fight human adversaries. So it's certainly an area where I'm spending a lot of time.
Super. Varun, any last words on sort of focus areas for you going forward, also maybe because of COVID?
I think both Thomas and Carolina have highlighted them. So I think security is one, healthcare is another. I think even beyond mental health, we're seeing people more willing to chat with their doctors over video and complement sort of in-person care, which has not been seen before. So people would use it primarily as a tool in emergencies. Now they're sort of using it more routinely, which is a big change. But I think the only thing I'll add is sort of in fintech. So we're seeing this whole sort of emergence on the infrastructure side around sort of payment and banking infrastructure. And, we've seen a few companies in Europe that have that are emerging, but just at an early stage, we see so many more, and I think that's another big trend that's really been accelerated by COVID.
I fully agree. So then I think it's time to wrap it up. If my sheet says it correctly. So thank you very much, Carolina, Varun, Thomas. This was super insightful and exciting as well. So thank you very much for joining.